It had been 3 days since I'd eaten a proper meal. My stomach ached, my lips were dry, and the soles of my shoes had started to split open. The November wind bit through my thin jacket as I walked down the empty street of a small town whose name I didn't even know. Everything smelled faintly of rain and smoke, that damp, cold scent that clings to your clothes when you've nowhere to go. I remember thinking that I didn't belong there. Maybe I didn't belong anywhere. Most people avoided looking at me. A few glanced over and turned away, pretending to be busy with their phones or coffee cups. My reflection in the glass of a bakery window startled me. Hollow cheeks, messy hair, and eyes that looked older than 23. I used to have a smile once. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it. Across the street, a small general store caught my attention. Its window was fogged from the inside, and a sign above the door read, "Harris & Sons, Supplies and Repairs." The lights were warm, glowing softly against the gray afternoon. My feet moved before my mind could stop them. Maybe they had leftover bread. Maybe if I was lucky they'd let me rest for a moment. The bell above the door gave a soft ring as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of wood polish and coffee. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with tools, canned goods, and old magazines. Behind the counter stood a man, mid-30s maybe, with rolled-up sleeves and a few strands of dark hair falling over his forehead. He looked up when he heard the bell, and his eyes, kind, steady, found mine. "Hey there," he said, his voice calm but curious. "You look like you've had a rough day." I hesitated, unsure whether to answer. Most people didn't notice. Most didn't care. I kept my hands deep in my pockets and mumbled, "Just passing through." He nodded slowly, studying me for a moment. Not like I was a threat, but like he was trying to read the story written across my tired face. "Well, passing through or not, you're welcome here." "Coffee?" I almost laughed. "I don't have money," I muttered, already stepping back toward the door. He shrugged. "Didn't ask for any. That stopped me." My stomach growled softly, betraying me. I looked at him again, half expecting to see a smirk or pity. But there was none. Only quiet sincerity. He motioned to a small table near the corner where a pot of coffee and a few biscuits sat. "Go on, it's fresh." I stood there for a moment, battling my pride. Then hunger won. I sat down carefully, wrapping my hands around the steaming cup he placed in front of me. The warmth burned my palms, but it felt good, grounding. I took a sip, and it was the best thing I'd tasted in weeks. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eli," I said after a pause. "Yours?" "Daniel," he replied. "This is my store. Been running it since my dad passed." There was a quiet respect in his tone when he said it. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of an old heater and the distant tap of rain against the window. My chest loosened slightly, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "You from around here?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "No, been moving around. Looking for work, I guess. Guess?" he repeated, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I looked down. It's hard to find something steady when you've got nothing to start with. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that." I doubted he really did. People like him never could. But there was no judgment in his voice, just understanding, and somehow that made me want to believe him. After I finished the coffee, he walked over with a small paper bag. "Here," he said, "sandwich and a bit of fruit. You can eat it here or take it with you." I stared at the bag, then at him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you look like you need someone to," he said simply. "And because I can." Something in me tightened, part gratitude, part disbelief. I'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with a price, but there was something different about Daniel. His tone wasn't sweet or oversympathetic. It was steady, like someone who'd made peace with helping others without expecting anything in return. Still, I couldn't let myself trust too easily. "I'll pay you back one day," I muttered. He smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything, Eli." That sentence stayed with me long after I left the shop that evening. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shiny under the streetlights. I found a bench near the corner and sat there, clutching the paper bag like it was something sacred. Inside was a ham sandwich. Simple, ordinary. But it made my throat tighten. For years I'd been surviving on scraps, on people's leftovers, on promises that never came true. But that day, a stranger had offered me something different. Not just food, not just warmth, but a glimpse of something I thought I'd lost. Human decency. As I ate, I caught sight of Daniel through the store window, still behind the counter, writing something in a small notebook. The glow of the shop framed him like a soft halo against the dark street. For the first time in months, I felt a faint spark of warmth, not just in my hands, but somewhere deep inside my chest. Maybe the world hadn't completely forgotten me after all. And as the night settled over the small town, I promised myself one thing. I'd come back tomorrow. Not because I needed more food, but because something about that store and the man inside it made me feel seen. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds somewhere far away, and the sharp ache in my back from sleeping on a bench. My jacket was damp with dew, my fingers stiff from the cold. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the faint memory of warmth, coffee, and Daniel's voice came back to me. The thought of that quiet store gave me a strange comfort. I hadn't planned on going back, but something in me, a kind of fragile pull, made me stand and start walking toward it. By the time I reached Harris & Sons, the town had already come alive. Cars moved slowly through the narrow main street, and a group of kids ran past me laughing, their backpacks bouncing. The world felt ordinary again, painfully so. When I stepped inside, Daniel was stacking boxes near the counter. He turned, and his face lit up with a faint smile. "Morning, Eli. You made it through the night?" I nodded. "Barely." He set the box down and gestured to the back. "You can warm up by the heater if you want. I was just about to make some coffee." The casual kindness in his tone still caught me off guard. I muttered a thanks and sat down, watching him move around the shop with easy confidence. Everything about him, the way he hummed under his breath, the quiet patience in his gestures, felt foreign to me, like he hadn't been worn down by the world the way I had. He poured 2 mugs and handed me one. "You looking for work around here?" I hesitated, trying to, but it's hard without a proper address, you know? "Yeah," he said softly. "I know that feeling. My dad used to say everyone deserves one good break in life. Maybe this town will give you yours." I smiled faintly at that, though something inside me resisted believing it. He went back to sorting tools while I drank. For a while, we talked about small things. The weather, the broken sign outside, how the town used to have a movie theater that shut down years ago. It was easy, easier than I expected. Then the bell above the door rang, and a middle-aged woman stepped in. She looked like she'd just come from church. Neat coat, tight bun, the kind of judgmental expression I'd seen too many times. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to Daniel. "You shouldn't let people like that hang around here," she whispered harshly, not realizing I could hear every word. "You'll scare off your real customers." The words hit like a slap. Daniel frowned. "He's just having some coffee, Mrs. Keene, that's all." But she didn't back down. "People talk, Daniel. Don't say I didn't warn you." When she finally left, the silence felt heavy. Daniel sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Don't take it to heart. She's old-fashioned," but I already had. The bitterness that lived under my skin for years started to rise again. "You don't have to defend me," I said quietly. "She's right. People like me don't belong in places like this." "Eli, no, it's fine." I stood, setting the mug down a little too hard. "I get it. I'll go." He reached out as if to stop me. "That's not what I meant." But I was already halfway to the door. "You don't have to explain. I know how this works." I stepped out before he could say another word. The cold air hit my face like punishment. I walked fast, not caring where I went, my heart pounding with anger that wasn't really meant for him. It was meant for everyone who'd ever looked at me and seen nothing but trouble. By the time I reached the edge of town, the sky had darkened. The smell of rain lingered again. I sat behind a gas station, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to swallow the ache building inside me. That's when a car pulled up nearby. The driver, a man in his late 20s, baseball cap, sharp grin, leaned out the window. "Hey, you okay, man?" I hesitated. He looked friendly enough. Maybe too friendly. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice cracked. He looked me up and down, eyes lingering a little too long. "You look like you could use a lift, or at least a meal. Hop in. I know a diner up the road." Something inside me warned don't. But hunger and exhaustion had a way of silencing that voice. I climbed in. The car smelled faintly of smoke and cheap cologne. He turned the engine on, humming to some song on the radio. "So, what's your story?" he asked after a while. "Not much of one," I said. "Just trying to get by." He nodded, pretending to understand. But the way his eyes flicked toward me every few seconds made me uneasy. I realized too late that I didn't even know his name. When he stopped outside a rundown diner, he turned to me and said, "Tell you what, wait here. I'll grab us something." He stepped out, leaving the engine running. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He never came back. When I finally got out and looked around, the parking lot was empty, and so was the passenger seat where I'd left my bag. The only thing I owned. Inside it were my ID, a spare shirt, and the few dollars I'd saved. Gone. I just stood there under the flickering neon light of the diner sign, unable to move. The rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, washing the dirt down the cracked pavement. It wasn't the money that hurt most. It was the confirmation. The world hadn't changed. I'd been foolish enough to think it might. That night, I sat under a bus shelter shivering. I thought of Daniel's quiet store, the warm smell of coffee, his calm eyes that never judged. I wondered if he'd think I was a fool for running off like that. Maybe he'd already forgotten me. Maybe that was better. Still, as I closed my eyes against the cold, one thought lingered in the back of my mind. If kindness exists, it must look something like him, and for the first time in a long while, I wished I'd stayed. 2 nights passed before I found the courage to return to town. The rain hadn't stopped. It had turned the roads into shallow streams, the air cold enough to sting my skin. I didn't plan on going back to the store. I just wanted to see it. The warm lights through the glass, proof that some corner of the world still glowed. When I reached Harris & Sons, the sign above the door was half lit, the rest flickering. Through the window, I saw Daniel sweeping the floor. For a long moment, I just stood there, drenched, watching him move around quietly like he always did. Calm, steady, as if nothing could touch him. Then he looked up. Our eyes met through the glass. He didn't look angry or disappointed, just surprised. Then he set the broom aside and opened the door. "Eli," he said softly, "you look freezing. Come in." I wanted to apologize, to explain why I'd left, but my throat closed up. My clothes clung to my skin, and I was shaking too much to speak. Without another word, Daniel locked the door behind me and guided me toward the small heater near the back. He handed me a towel. "Here, sit down. You'll make yourself sick standing there." My voice cracked. I shouldn't have left like that. He crouched beside me, meeting my eyes. "You don't owe me an apology." I blinked at him, the words catching me off guard. He smiled faintly. "I should have stopped her from saying those things. That woman doesn't get to decide what kind of person you are." Something inside me loosened. The tension I'd carried since childhood, that instinct to defend myself before anyone could hurt me, began to fade, if only a little. He poured me a cup of coffee again, just like before. "Drink this," he said gently. "Then you can tell me what happened." So I did. I told him about the man with the car, about losing my bag, about feeling stupid for trusting anyone again. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer false comfort. He just listened, his eyes steady and kind, his hands wrapped around his own mug as if to stop himself from reaching out. When I finished, silence filled the space between us. Then he said quietly, "You've been through too much alone." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. After a moment, he stood and grabbed his coat. "Come on," he said. "You can't stay out there tonight." "Where are we going?" "My house. It's not far." I hesitated. "You don't even know me," he smiled. "I know enough to see you need a roof and a door that locks. That's all that matters right now." I wanted to refuse, to protect what little pride I had left, but exhaustion won. So I followed him. Daniel's house was small but warm, the kind of place that felt lived in. A pair of boots by the door, framed photos on the wall, the smell of cinnamon and something faintly woody. He led me to a guest room down the hall. It wasn't much. A narrow bed, a small dresser, a lamp. But it felt like luxury after nights on benches and bus shelters. "You can shower if you want," he said. "There are towels in the bathroom. I'll find you some dry clothes." I nodded mutely. When I stepped into the bathroom, steam filled the small space. I stood under the hot water until the mirror fogged over completely, until my body stopped shaking. It felt like I was washing away more than dirt. Like I was letting go of a part of my past that had clung to me too tightly. When I came out, dressed in one of Daniel's shirts that hung loose on me, he was setting a plate of food on the kitchen table. "You didn't have to." He cut me off gently. "Eat first. Talk later," I obeyed. The food wasn't fancy, soup and bread, but it might as well have been a feast. As I ate, he sat across from me, sipping his tea. The silence between us was comfortable this time. When I finally looked up, he was smiling faintly. "You know," he said, "most people wouldn't have come back. I'm glad you did." I swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd want to see me again." He tilted his head. "I don't give up on people that easily." Something in his tone, steady, certain, made me look away. I wasn't used to being cared for without expectation. Days passed. Daniel insisted I stay until I got back on my feet. At first, I felt awkward, like I was intruding on a life that wasn't mine. But he never made me feel that way. We fell into a rhythm. I helped out at the shop during the day, unpacking boxes, cleaning shelves, fixing things under his instruction. In the evenings, we'd sit in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his father, about growing up in that same house, about how the store had barely survived the pandemic. I told him bits of my story, the kind I could say aloud, about leaving home young, working odd jobs, trying to find something that felt like stability. He never asked for more than I was ready to give. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, not out of curiosity, but out of quiet concern, like he wanted to make sure I was really okay. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows. A small fire crackled in the corner. Daniel was reading the newspaper while I sorted through a box of old tools he'd asked me to clean. After a while, he folded the paper and said, "You ever think about settling somewhere? Not just passing through?" I looked up. "Sometimes. But every time I do, something goes wrong." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's because you've been running from people who never deserved you in the first place." His words hit deeper than I expected. I stared at the flickering firelight. "It's hard to believe in good people after everything." "I get that," he said softly. "But maybe it's not about believing in people. Maybe it's about believing you deserve better." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. No one had ever said that to me before. When I finally looked at him, he smiled. Not the polite kind, but the warm, tired one of someone who understood. And just like that, the silence between us shifted. Not heavy, not awkward, but full of something unspoken. That night, when I went to bed in the small guest room, I lay awake listening to the rain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Maybe this wasn't just shelter. Maybe it was the beginning of something I didn't dare name yet. A place where the broken parts of me could start to heal. The rain began just after sunset. A thin drizzle that turned into a roaring downpour within minutes. From the guest room window, I watched as the sky cracked open, lightning streaking across it like veins of fury. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches, shaking shutters, and making the whole house tremble with the sound of it. But the storm outside wasn't half as violent as the one rising inside me. That evening had started quietly. We'd been sitting in the living room, me on the old sofa, him on the armchair by the fireplace. He was reading, and I was trying to lose myself in the steady rhythm of the flames. Everything had begun to feel normal, peaceful even, until the loud knock came. At first, we thought it was a neighbor, maybe someone checking on us because of the weather. But when he opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood there, rain dripping from their hats, their expressions cold and sharp. "Is there a young man staying here?" one of them asked. My heart sank. I knew that tone. I'd heard it before. Suspicion, judgment, the presumption that someone like me didn't belong. Before I could speak, they pushed inside, flashing a paper I couldn't even read properly. Something about questioning, something about property theft. Lies, all lies. Someone in the last town must have reported me. Maybe the man I'd worked for. Maybe someone who just didn't like the look of me sleeping behind a shop. He tried to defend me. "You've got the wrong person," he said, his voice calm but firm. "He's been here for days. He's done nothing wrong." They didn't listen. One of them grabbed my arm. I flinched instinctively, memories flashing. Other nights, other hands dragging me out into the cold. I pulled back, panicked. "I didn't do anything!" I shouted. But the more I spoke, the guiltier I looked. He stepped forward again, placing himself between us. "Let me talk to your superior," he demanded. "You're making a mistake," but they wouldn't hear it. They shoved him aside and cuffed me. I'll never forget the look on his face as they pulled me out of the door. His expression wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. Fear. Helplessness. Like watching something precious slip away before he could stop it. The rain soaked through my clothes as they led me to their car. I could barely breathe. The flashing lights turned the world into streaks of red and blue. The sound of thunder swallowed my voice as I tried to call out to him. That night in the holding cell felt endless. The cold bit into my bones, the concrete under me unforgiving. I'd been here before. Not in this exact place, but in this feeling. Betrayal again. Hope crushed again. I told myself not to care, that I'd been stupid to think this could have ended differently. But something was different this time. When morning came, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The guard stopped at my cell, keys clinking. "You've got someone here for you," he said. And there he was, standing in front of me, raincoat still damp, eyes tired but burning with determination. He'd been up all night. He'd gone to the station, argued, shown them proof, bank slips, receipts, anything that tied me to his home. He'd even brought a lawyer. A lawyer. "I told you I wouldn't let them take you," he said quietly when the officer opened the cell. I didn't know what to say. Words caught somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The streets were still slick with water, puddles reflecting the washed-out sky. He opened the car door for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at him. This man who didn't owe me anything, who had every reason to walk away, but didn't. When we got home, he made me tea. The same gentle routine as before, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. As I sat there, wrapped in a blanket, watching steam rise from the mug in my hands, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe in years. Someone had fought for me, not out of pity, not out of duty, but because they cared. And though I couldn't say it out loud, the feeling in my chest was clear and terrifying and beautiful all at once. For the first time, I wasn't alone in the storm. Days turned into weeks. The storm that had torn through our lives had passed, but its memory lingered, not as fear anymore, but as proof that something inside both of us had changed. The town was quieter now, or maybe I'd just learned to hear it differently. Mornings came soft and slow, sunlight spilling through thin curtains, the smell of tea drifting from the kitchen. I'd wake up to the faint clatter of dishes, the sound of his voice humming some half-forgotten tune. For the first time in years, mornings didn't feel like something to survive. They felt like something to live. We didn't talk about that night much. We didn't need to. It lived between us, a silent thread that pulled us closer in ways words never could. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, not out of worry, but in quiet reassurance, as if to remind himself that I was still here, still safe. One afternoon, we were fixing the broken fence out back, or more accurately, he was fixing it while I held the tools and tried not to make it worse. The air smelled of wet wood and grass, and the sky was that soft shade of blue that always made me think of forgiveness. "You know," he said, wiping his brow, "you don't have to keep saying thank you." I blinked, surprised. "I haven't said it in days," he chuckled. "You don't have to think it either." I looked down, smiling despite myself. Maybe I just don't know how else to show it. He leaned on the fence post, looking at me with that calm, steady gaze that always seemed to see too much. "Then don't, just live. That's enough." There it was, the kind of kindness I'd never understood before. It wasn't loud or grand. It didn't demand or expect. It just was. That night, we sat by the fire again. The same spot where everything had begun to shift. The world outside was quiet, the kind of silence that holds peace rather than emptiness. I found myself speaking before I could stop. "I used to think love was supposed to hurt," I said softly, like it only counted if it left scars. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes reflecting the firelight. But now, I hesitated, searching for the right words. Now I think maybe it's the opposite. Maybe love's the thing that makes the hurting stop, even if just for a while. He smiled then, that small, unguarded smile that made everything around him seem warmer. "You've learned something I wish more people knew." Silence followed, comfortable and full. The flames danced between us, their glow wrapping around the room like a heartbeat. I felt something loosen inside me. The constant need to defend, to explain, to be enough. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Later, when I went to bed, I paused at the door to my room. "Good night," I said. "Good night," he replied. Then, after a pause, his voice softer. "I'm glad you stayed." I lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling, those words echoing quietly in my chest. "I'm glad you stayed." They weren't a confession, not the kind people wrote songs about, but they were enough. Because for someone like me, staying had never been easy. And for the first time, it felt like home. Months passed. The town bloomed into spring, wildflowers growing in places they shouldn't, like hope returning to the soil. I found work helping him around the shop, learned to laugh again, even started speaking to people in town without flinching. Every small thing felt like a victory. And every time I stumbled, he was there, patient as ever. One evening we closed up early. The sun was sinking low, casting golden light across the shop windows. He handed me a cup of coffee, and we stood by the door watching the world turn amber. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked suddenly. "Sometimes," he said, "but then I think about what I'd miss." I turned to look at him, and he was already watching me. The moment stretched, quiet, steady, real. In that silence, I understood what love truly was. Not passion or possession. Not the desperate kind that burns too bright and dies too fast. It was this. The safety of being seen, the warmth of being remembered, the gentle act of someone choosing to stay even when the world gives them every reason not to. I didn't need grand gestures. I didn't need promises carved in stone. I just needed this. The small, steady truth of two souls rebuilding what the world once broke. The evening wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of rain and wildflowers. I smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running anymore. I was home.